The mail-order bride arrives during a plague and is quarantined with the town's handsome doctor. The train wheezed to a stop at Cedar Falls Station, its black smoke mingling with the gray October sky of 1918. Emma Richardson pressed her face against the grimy window, watching passengers hurry past with handkerchiefs pressed to their faces. The Spanish flu had reached even this remote corner of Montana, and the evidence was everywhere. In the empty streets, the shuttered shops, and the fearful glances of those few souls brave enough to venture outside. Her hands trembled as she clutched the worn photograph of Thomas Whitmore, the rancher, who had answered her advertisement for correspondence. 3 months of letters had led to this moment, stepping off a train in a town she'd never seen to marry a man she'd never met. At 26, Emma had exhausted her options back in Chicago. The factory where she'd worked had closed, her meager savings were gone, and the influenza outbreak had made finding work nearly impossible. All passengers must report for health inspection. A gruff voice called from the platform. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing tales. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from our viewers around the world. Emma gathered her single carpet bag and stepped onto the platform, her heart hammering against her ribs. A tall man in a long coat approached the small group of arriving passengers, his medical bag in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Even with a mask covering the lower half of his face, she could see intelligent brown eyes and unruly dark hair beneath his hat. "I'm Dr. Samuel Hayes," he announced, his voice carrying authority despite his youth. He couldn't be much older than 30. Due to the influenza outbreak, all new arrivals must be examined and potentially quarantined. Please form a line. Emma's stomach dropped. She had exactly $3 to her name and nowhere to stay if quarantine was required. As she waited her turn, she studied the doctor's movements. He was gentle with an elderly woman, patient with a crying child, and thorough with everyone. When her turn came, she found herself looking into kind eyes that crinkled at the corners despite the serious circumstances. "Name?" he asked, consulting his clipboard. "Emma Richardson." Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "Purpose of visit to Cedar Falls?" Heat flooded her cheeks. I'm here to meet Thomas Whitmore. We're to be married." Something flickered in the doctor's eyes, but he merely nodded and reached for his thermometer. "Open your mouth, please." His fingers were surprisingly gentle as he checked her temperature, then listened to her breathing with his stethoscope. The examination was professional, but Emma found herself acutely aware of his proximity, the faint scent of carbolic soap that clung to him, and the way his brow furrowed in concentration. "Any symptoms? Fever, chills, body aches?" "No, sir. I feel fine." He made a note on his clipboard, then looked up at her again. Those brown eyes held a compassion that made her chest tight with unexpected emotion. "Miss Richardson, I'm afraid I have some difficult news. Thomas Whitmore passed away 4 days ago from the influenza." The world seemed to tilt beneath Emma's feet. She gripped the edge of his examination table, fighting the wave of dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. He's dead?" "I'm very sorry. He was a good man." Dr. Hayes set down his clipboard and took a step closer, as if ready to catch her should she fall. "Do you have family you can return to?" Emma shook her head, not trusting her voice. The $3 in her reticule wouldn't even cover a train ticket back to Chicago, and what would be the point? There was nothing waiting for her there, but empty tenements and closed factories. "I see." The doctor's voice was gentle. "Miss Richardson, I'm going to have to ask you to remain in quarantine for 5 days as a precautionary measure. Normally, we'd house you at the boarding house, but Mrs. Patterson is recovering from the flu herself. I have a small cabin behind my clinic that's been thoroughly disinfected. It's modest, but clean and warm." "I can't pay," Emma whispered, humiliation burning in her throat. "I barely have enough money for food." "There's no charge for medical quarantine," Dr. Hayes replied firmly. "It's a matter of public health. Come, let me show you to the cabin." The doctor's clinic sat on Main Street, a tidy wooden building with freshly painted white trim. Behind it, connected by a covered walkway, stood a small log cabin that looked like something from a fairy tale. Inside, Emma found a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed with clean quilts, a small table, and 2 chairs. Shelves lined one wall, filled with medical texts and what appeared to be novels. "I use this space for patients who need extended care," Dr. Hayes explained, setting her bag on the table. "There's a pump for water just outside, and I'll bring meals from the diner when they're open. Mrs. Chen, she runs the place, makes excellent soup." "Dr. Hayes, Samuel," he corrected gently. "And you don't need to thank me. It's my job to protect the health of this community, which includes making sure you're properly cared for during quarantine." After he left, Emma sank onto the bed and allowed herself to cry, for Thomas Whitmore, whom she'd never had the chance to know, for her desperate circumstances, and for the terrifying uncertainty of what would happen when the 5 days were over. Through the small window, she could see the back of the clinic, and occasionally catch glimpses of Dr. Hayes, Samuel, moving past the windows as he tended to his patients. The first evening, he brought her a bowl of Mrs. Chen's promised soup, along with fresh bread and a pot of coffee. He set the tray on her table and lingered as if reluctant to leave. "Have you eaten today?" Emma asked, noticing the tired lines around his eyes. "I'll eat later." He rubbed the back of his neck. "It's been a long day, lost 2 more patients to the flu." Without thinking, Emma gestured to the second chair. "Would you like to sit for a moment? You look exhausted." Samuel hesitated, then settled into the chair with a heavy sigh. "I shouldn't stay long. Need to maintain proper quarantine protocols." "Of course." Emma tore off a piece of bread and handed it to him. "But you can't help anyone if you collapse from hunger." A smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he accepted the bread. "Spoken like someone with medical training." "Factory work, actually. But my mother was a nurse before she married. She always said doctors were the worst at taking care of themselves." "Smart woman." Samuel took a bite of bread and closed his eyes briefly. "God, I can't remember the last time I ate something that wasn't standing up." They ate in comfortable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the distant whistle of the evening train. Emma found herself studying his face in the firelight, the strong jaw, the laugh lines that suggested he smiled often under normal circumstances, the gentle way he held his coffee cup. "Tell me about Chicago," he said suddenly. "I've never been to a city that large." Emma described the bustling streets, the towering buildings, the constant noise and movement. She told him about the factory where she'd worked, the small apartment she'd shared with 2 other girls, the way the lake looked on summer evenings. As she spoke, she realized how much she'd missed having someone to talk to. "It sounds exciting," Samuel said. "Why leave?" The question hung in the air between them. Emma set down her coffee cup, choosing her words carefully. "The war changed everything. So many men gone, jobs scarce, then the influenza came and everything just stopped. I had no family left, no prospects. Thomas's letters offered hope for a different kind of life." "What did he tell you about himself?" "That he owned a cattle ranch outside town, that he was lonely and wanted a wife who could appreciate the simple things, a warm home, good conversation, the beauty of Montana." Emma's voice grew soft. His letters were kind. He seemed like a good man. He was. Samuel leaned back in his chair. "Tom Whitmore was one of the most decent men I've ever known. He would have made you happy, I think." The words carried a weight of sadness that made Emma's chest ache. She wanted to ask Samuel about his own life, his own loneliness, but something in his expression warned her not to probe too deeply. Over the next few days, their evening conversations became a ritual that Emma found herself anticipating with an eagerness that surprised her. Samuel would arrive with her dinner, claiming he needed to check on her health, and somehow end up staying for an hour or more. They talked about books. He lent her volumes from his shelves, about medicine, about their dreams and disappointments. "I wanted to be a surgeon," Samuel confessed on the 3rd evening. "Studied in Boston, had plans to work in a big city hospital." But my father got sick and someone needed to take over his practice here in Cedar Falls. Do you regret it? Samuel considered the question, staring into the fire. Some days, especially when I lose patience to things that might have been treatable in a better equipped facility. But this community needs a doctor, and I've grown to love the people here. There's something to be said for knowing every patient's story, for being part of their lives rather than just treating their symptoms. On the fourth day, Emma woke to find snow falling outside her window and no sign of Samuel. She waited through the morning, then the afternoon, growing increasingly worried. Finally, as darkness fell, she saw a light in the clinic and made a decision that probably violated every quarantine protocol. She pulled on her coat and crossed the covered walkway. She found Samuel slumped over his desk, surrounded by medical journals and empty coffee cups. He looked up as she entered, his eyes red with exhaustion. "Emma, you shouldn't be here. Quarantine is almost over anyway," she finished firmly. "Samuel, when did you last sleep?" "I've been treating the Morrison family. All 5 children have come down with the flu." His voice cracked slightly. "I can't lose them. I can't lose any more patients." Emma moved around the desk and placed her hand on his shoulder. Through his shirt, she could feel the tension in his muscles, the way his body trembled with exhaustion. "You can't save everyone, but you can't help anyone if you don't take care of yourself. I'm the only doctor for 50 miles, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If I stop, people die. If you collapse, more people die." Emma's voice was gentle but firm. "Come on, you need food and rest." She managed to coax him back to the cabin, where she heated soup on the fire and made him eat while she listened to him talk about his patients. The Morrison children, the elderly blacksmith fighting pneumonia, the pregnant woman who'd developed complications. Each case weighed on him like a physical burden. "I became a doctor to help people," Samuel said, staring into his coffee cup. "But sometimes I feel like I'm just watching them slip away." Emma reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "My mother told me something once. She said healing isn't just about medicine. It's about hope. And hope is what you give people just by being there, by caring enough to fight for them, even when the odds are bad." Samuel's fingers turned under hers, palm to palm, and for a moment they simply held hands across the small table. Emma felt something shift in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling nearby. "Emma," Samuel said quietly, "your quarantine ends tomorrow." The words hit her like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on their growing connection that she'd managed to push aside the reality of her situation. Tomorrow, she'd have to leave the safety of the cabin and figure out how to survive in a strange town with no money and no prospects. "I know," she tried to keep her voice steady. "I'll find work somewhere. Maybe Mrs. needs help at the diner. The flu has hit everyone hard. Most businesses are barely staying afloat." Samuel's thumb traced across her knuckles. "Emma, I have a proposition." Her heart jumped, but she kept her expression neutral. "What kind of proposition?" "I need help at the clinic. Someone who can assist with patients, keep records, help with basic care. It doesn't pay much, but it includes room and board." He paused, meeting her eyes. "You could stay in the cabin, permanently." Emma stared at him, hardly daring to hope. "You'd trust me with medical duties? I have no formal training." "You have something more valuable, compassion and common sense. I could teach you the rest." Samuel's grip on her hand tightened. "Emma, these past few days, talking with you, sharing meals, it's reminded me that there's more to life than just work and worry." "Samuel, I'm not asking for anything beyond professional partnership," he said quickly. "I know you came here to marry Thomas, and I respect that. I'm simply offering you employment and a place to stay." But Emma could see in his eyes that he was offering much more than that. The question was whether she was brave enough to accept it. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Emma's official quarantine was over, but she found herself reluctant to leave the cabin that had become a sanctuary. Samuel arrived with coffee, and what appeared to be a formal contract. "Employment agreement," he explained, setting the papers on the table. "Standard terms for a medical assistant. Room, board, and $20 a month." Emma read through the contract, noting that the terms were more than generous. "This is very fair. More than fair. There's one more thing." Samuel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This came for you yesterday, from Thomas Whitmore's lawyer." Emma's hands shook as she opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. As she read, her eyes widened in disbelief. "He left me money," she whispered. "Thomas left me $500. He arranged it with his lawyer before he died, in case something happened to him before I arrived." Samuel nodded. "Tom was always thorough about such things. He wanted to make sure you'd be provided for." $500 was more money than Emma had ever seen in one place. It represented freedom, choices, the ability to go anywhere and start over. She could return to Chicago or travel to California or any of a dozen other possibilities. "This changes things," she said quietly. Samuel's face went carefully blank. "Of course, you have options now." Emma set the letter down and looked around the small cabin that had become home in just 5 days. She thought about the evening conversations, the way Samuel's eyes lit up when he talked about a patient he'd helped save, the gentle way he'd cared for her during quarantine. She thought about the loneliness that had driven her to answer Thomas Whitmore's advertisement in the first place. "Yes," she said finally, "I do have options." She picked up the pen and signed the employment contract. Samuel's face transformed, relief and something deeper flooding his features. "Emma, are you sure? You could go anywhere with that money." "I could," she agreed, standing and moving to the window where she could see the main street of Cedar Falls. Snow was beginning to fall again, and she could see people hurrying past with their coats pulled tight against the cold. "But I think I'd rather stay somewhere I'm needed, somewhere I can make a difference." She turned back to face him, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. "Besides, a wise woman once told me that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about hope, and I think this town could use some hope." Samuel crossed the room in 2 quick strides, stopping just inches away from her. "Emma, I need to tell you something. These past few days, what I feel for you. It's not just professional respect." "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too. I know you came here to marry Thomas, and I don't want to dishonor his memory or take advantage of your situation." Emma reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble beneath her palm. "Samuel, I came here looking for a new life. Maybe this isn't the life I expected, but it might be exactly the life I need." He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "Are you sure? I can't offer you wealth or luxury. Just a small-town doctor's life, with long hours and constant worry about patients. And evening conversations by the fire, and the satisfaction of helping people. And a partner who understands the value of hope?" Emma smiled. "That sounds like a pretty good life to me." Samuel's arms came around her then, holding her close as the snow fell outside their window. Emma felt something settle in her chest, a sense of belonging she'd never experienced before. She'd come to Cedar Falls as a mail-order bride, but she'd found something much more valuable, a true partnership, a place where she was needed, and the beginning of a love story she could never have imagined. 6 months later, as spring painted the Montana mountains in shades of green and gold, Emma stood in the same small church where Thomas Whitmore's funeral had been held. But today was a celebration. Her wedding to Samuel Hayes, the doctor who had quarantined her heart along with her body, and never let either one go. The influenza epidemic had finally passed, leaving Cedar Falls battered but not broken. Emma had proven herself invaluable at the clinic, learning to suture wounds, assist with births, and provide the kind of compassionate care that helped patients heal not just physically, but emotionally. The townspeople had embraced her as one of their own, and she'd found the sense of community she'd never known in Chicago's crowded anonymity. As Samuel slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Emma thought about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd answered an advertisement for a mail-order bride and found something infinitely more precious. A true marriage of hearts and minds, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose. "I love you, Mrs. Hayes," Samuel whispered as he kissed her. "I love you too, Dr. Hayes," she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. The reception was held in the clinic's waiting room. Transformed with wildflowers and bunting, Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast despite the ongoing food shortages, and the entire town seemed to have turned out to celebrate. Emma found herself surrounded by the patients she'd helped care for, the Morrison children, recovered and rosy-cheeked, the elderly blacksmith back on his feet and raising toasts, the pregnant woman, now cradling a healthy baby girl. As the evening wore on and the guests began to drift home, Emma and Samuel found themselves alone in their small cabin behind the clinic. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls lined with medical books and novels. Emma had added her own touches over the months. Curtains at the windows, a quilt her mother had made, a collection of wildflowers in a mason jar. "No regrets?" Samuel asked, pulling her into his arms. Emma looked around at their simple home, thought about the life they were building together, the patients they would care for, the children they hoped to have, the quiet contentment of knowing they were exactly where they belonged. "None at all," she said, and kissed her husband under the Montana stars. Thank you so much for reading Emma and Samuel's heartwarming journey. What did you think of Emma's incredible transformation from a desperate mail-order bride to a beloved member of the Cedar Falls community? I'd love to hear about your favorite moment in the comments below. Was it their first meeting during quarantine? Those intimate evening conversations? Or perhaps the beautiful ending where love truly conquered all? Don't forget to like this story, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe for more incredible tales of love, hope, and second chances. More amazing stories are coming your way soon.